Chapter 5, All Around Us. McQuinn Storm Aaron. I realized I had much to do immediately upon regaining consciousness. Calmness engulfed my heart, and that's how I knew it was Saul I would find as I opened my eyes. She stood by my bed, the light casting shadows upon her face. I could not read what she was thinking. The wound on my neck began to throb, but I ignored it. "Did they escape?" I asked. Saul studied me. "A few died, but most of them escaped. Gray men who could vanish in thin air were such cheaters. Invisibility was a most useful power, one that would prove valuable in a war, but they were gray men who opposed me." "What are the accounts?" I asked. "Don't, yet. Stay here. I have asked the generals to give a complete account of what happened. I would have them ready in the morning," she said. "I want the accounts now," I shouted. Then, I rose from the bed, fuming. Saul still did not understand the importance of wielding powers. Powers that I could have the most use of. Before she could use her power of calmness on me, I threw my chamber door open and rushed out. Soldiers scurried upon seeing me, and they fell into a formation before trailing after me. When I reached the end of the hall, I saw the moons outside through the wide window. The sky was still dark, but Sisis had begun to rise. The horizon was starting to glow like it was making a promise. "No one must follow me," I said in an icy tone. The soldiers behind me stirred, but none protested. Then, I summoned the clouds and leapt through the open window. A long time ago, the tree runners were banished from the land. Northsome had done that to punish them for a crime they never committed. However, nobody knew that. They were not even sent to trial because of the imminent danger they posed. 7 lords were dead in days. What kind of emperor would pass sentence without a trial? But I knew the real story and could use the information well. As I flew against the cold wind, I wondered if what I was about to do was right. But when did doing the right thing ever matter to me? Everything had to have a significant impact. That's what was important to me. I glided on the cloud until I reached the middle of the Sinista forest. Then, my feet touched the ground as the fog thinned and vanished. I looked around, but there was nothing much to be seen. When night falls upon Sinista, even the bravest of men cower. My hackles rose from the thought that a hubbub could come out of nowhere and attack me. And not just hubbubs, other creatures of the night would find it pleasing to devour upon anyone's flesh. I must do what I must. Do it now. Where could they be? Sinista was dead, and the only sound I could hear was from night birds. Every twig breaking could be heard because there was no one else that stirred inside the forest. Could they see me now? Did they sense my presence upon entering their habitation? "Come out!" I shouted. Nobody stirred in the forest. "Come out! I order you!" I waited patiently. "Come out!" I yelled a third time. The birds perched on the trees flew, their wings fluttering in the air as they circled the horizon. When they would not come out, I shouted, "You've been in hiding for far too long. Make yourselves my ally. Swear to me. Have fealty with me, and I will pardon you. You will be welcomed in Akean. You will once again roam the lands doing what you were intended to do. But swear to me." The forest remained as silent as it was when I arrived. I had to make this work. Akean was stirring. The prophecies about the claiming of Akean were slowly happening. Rebellions were starting to rise. But I could fight them. I could fight what was about to happen if I planned carefully enough and raised allies as strong as these tree runners. "I know of your innocence, and I set you free." I paused. "But serve me." A tree stirred before me as though it had acquired the gift of motion. From the trunk came a man. The way they hid was surreal, as though they were one with the trees. The man's skin was as dark as a tree trunk. It was also wrinkled. It looked odd, yet it was their distinctive skin that offered them protection. I was face to face with a tree runner. His eyes held mine. He was taller than I, more overbearing, yet he was a castaway. He could not have been fit to stand before me without bowing. "What are your terms?" he asked in a slurred voice, as though his tongue had grown as thick as a tree trunk. I wanted to call down lightning at the man who had the gall to ask me about terms. But this time, I refrained from doing so because the tree runners would prove to be a powerful ally to use against the gray men. "Your freedom," I said. "Serve me, and I will set you free." The man raised his hand as though he were sending a signal to the rest of them. One by one, each tree trunk revealed a man hiding in its trunk. There were thousands of them, and I became self-conscious that if anyone had given the instruction to kill me, they could have done so. I gazed at each face of the tree runners. There were so many of them. They would be a good addition to my defense. "Will you serve me?" I repeated and waited for their responses. Elder Mayandilo. Andoni's body was buried at the foot of Mount Ricus, never to be found again, but I carried his head. It was heavy as though the body was still attached to it, or maybe the burden of having to tell Laren and Salvatore about what happened was weighing me down. On my waist, I strapped the general's sword. It was made of fine steel, and I couldn't throw it away, no matter if it was the thing that killed the chief hunter. I breathed in and closed my eyes in an attempt to calm myself. The last stretch of our journey left me panting. The war dogs' deaths had taken their toll on me too. Never touch a war dog. I bargained with Andoni. I never realized it was inevitable. Some deaths would happen the way they were destined to. My power had that flaw. The death of an animal I bonded with, if it was due to an unnatural death, was bound to make my life shorter. I wondered how many days or months were taken from my life. "Elder?" Bombay asked. I opened my eyes and looked at him. "Everyone's waiting for you in the town hall. I need to speak to Salvatore first." "I am here," Salvatore said. I turned around and found myself looking at Laren's uncle, a most overbearing man. His gaze made me shudder. If looks could freeze a man, he definitely would have frozen me. Bombay found his way out of the treehouse, leaving me alone with Salvatore. When it was just the two of us, I began speaking. "The retrieval was both a success and a failure," I said. "Jurosa's body was retrieved, but not without a price." I continued telling Salvatore about what happened, how Canellan soldiers came rushing out of the palace to fight us, and how the Nivens tried to keep their identities hidden until the time came that we had no option but to fight back. The war dogs' deaths were also included in my story. And the sword fight between Andoni San Diego and Renarcolo. Salvatore looked grim. His face was as hard as steel, his eyes menacingly cold. I stopped talking. "And where is the chief hunter?" he asked. I could not say the words. It was difficult to tell him about the chief hunter's demise and how it happened. More so because it was I who had to end it for Andoni. Instead, I bent down and pulled at the package I was carrying. I put it on the table and unwrapped it. The cloth fell to the sides as I worked my way into revealing what was inside. Salvatore groaned when his eyes met that of the chief hunters. He touched the chief hunter's eyelids and attempted to close them, but the flesh had gone hard, and the blue eyes would not allow Salvatore to close them. "Does Laren know?" Salvatore asked. "Not yet. It is my task to tell her after you learn about his death." "What did he say?" "His parting words? That you would know what to do," I answered. A touch of pain crossed Salvatore's face. For a fleeting second, I thought I glimpsed a softening and a trace of reverence in his eyes. A most courageous man. Stubborn in his ways, but courageous just the same, Salvatore said. He did well and should have been afforded the funeral he deserved. But his death would alarm everyone and cause the Nivens to panic. Only Laren and I should know. He paused. "For now." I nodded, trying to understand the significance of keeping Andoni's death a secret. I still shivered each time I remembered I had to tell Laren later. I heard a loud gasp from behind us, and I turned to look who it was. There, by the doorway, stood Laren with her ashen face. Her hands covered her mouth as tears sprung from her eyes. "What happened to my husband?" she cried, frozen to the spot. Salvatore looked around, seemingly conscious that anyone outside might hear us. "Calm yourself, Laren. When the Nivens hear about what happened, chaos will ensue, he said. In a softer tone, he added, we are not ready. She ran towards the table and clutched her husband's head. Then, she put the head back tenderly on the table as though moving faster could still hurt her husband. My heart twisted as I watched the agony of a woman who had lost her husband. She was, in my opinion, wailing silently. Was it evil to thank the gods for removing from me the burden of having to tell Laren about her husband's death? And yet why was it my heart was burdened upon seeing this woman suffer as she touched her husband's face? Her right hand lingered upon his eyes as though to close them. I caught my breath and waited and was surprised to find that they were now closed when Laren removed her hand over Andoni's glazed eyes. Salvatore touched Laren's shoulder, and as though on cue, Laren quickly embraced her uncle and sobbed. I wrapped Andoni's head again with the cloth, and when I was done, I summoned an eagle. When the eagle flew inside the treehouse, I told it what it had to do. The eagle took the package in its claws. It flew inside the treehouse in circles as though to bid us goodbye before flying out to bring the head to where I told it to go. Andoni said to tell you he is off to meet his friend in the sky, I said solemnly. Laren was shaking, standing beside me. Salvatore's hand rested on her shoulders. Laren visibly shivered while tears continued to flow from her eyes. He said you would know what he meant, I said. He is off to meet Timbuk Lassis's spirit. They will be out in the sky to play with swords, she said softly. I did not fully comprehend her words, but it was enough for me to understand that the chief hunter and his friend were both dead. Salvatore spoke after a while, it is time to assemble the Nivens in the town hall. They must be wanting to hear about the retrieval. He started walking, and upon reaching the doorway, he stopped. Dry your tears, Laren. We do not dishonor the memory of your husband today. And Elder Mayandilo, I welcome you to the Niven family. He turned to look at me. His eyes were still hard as steel, and they pierced me. But he spoke the words that I longed to hear since the first time I set foot on Niven. The Nivens will partner with the Elders Guild. I will make the declaration. From the doorway, Bombay came rushing in. His face was flushed from running, and we all stared at him. Romeo de Nicholas is back, he said speedily. Elder Tala is with him. The news that Bombay told us was jarring. How could the gods play with the events? The Nivens had prevented the report concerning their existence from reaching the Emperor through Elder Tala's capture, and yet, it was too late because the palace already knew. How the subsequent events would unravel, how we could contain the Niven's existence a secret still, and how we would prepare for the oncoming days now rested upon Salvatore and me. Salvatore caught my eye as though he knew what I was thinking. Let us go. It is time, he said. Then, we all walked towards the town hall in frigid silence, my heart frozen from anxiety. Dogan Rhonda. I could not say that the mission was a failure because Ames, Maniran, and I got Pyper with us, and we could return her safely to her father. But what about Kino? I also promised his mother I would take care of him. Something kept troubling me. I thought that in the fighting, I saw Lamare, but it could not be because I buried her myself. Pyper, I said. The little girl ignored me as though she was still sour at me. You must not be mad at me, you know, I said. Or if you must, be mad at Maniran. He was the one who tied you to the top of a tree. I was just making a joke to make things lighter, but Maniran did not seem to find what I said funny. It's a joke, I told him. He grunted and walked ahead. You have to help me rescue them. Pyper blurted out. She stopped suddenly, then turned to face me and pounded my stomach with her bare hands. True, she had tiny hands, but boy, can she punch. Hey, I said. Didn't I tell you that your father wanted you back in Niveton? We are serving him. We promised, and so we must return you to him. Pyper sobbed. But my friends, they're all going to die now. They're not going to die. There's a proper place and timing for everything, and right now, yours is home with your family. And what about Kino? She said. She met my eyes, and it was difficult not to feel guilty. I wish I could have saved Kino, too. And Mayo. I promised his mother that I would take care of him. So, I will. Pyper's crying somehow subsided. And Mayo too? I tucked her hair behind her ears before wiping some of her tears with my hand. And Mayo too, I bargained. Then, we started walking again. I could feel Pyper looking at me from the corner of her eye. I trust you, she said so suddenly I was surprised. That's good to hear. It is good to know that. I trust you only because Mistress Lamare is not dead. You did protect her from the Emperor. I stopped in my tracks. What? I thought I had seen her. But it had been a long day. There was a lot of fighting, plus we were in Sinista, and because of that, I thought I was hallucinating. But for Pyper to tell me this. Are you certain? I asked. She nodded. It was Kino's mother. It was a long story, but in the end, we were able to find out. I closed my eyes, angry at myself. I should have protected her. There were too many thoughts inside my head. What could have happened if I had been in Sinista at the right time? Would things have ended differently? Maybe, I would have been able to save all of them. Pyper tugged at my hand, and I was instantly brought out of my reverie. You are right. Everything has a proper place and time, she said in all innocence. We will save them. I blinked back the tears I did not know almost escaped my eyes. I had mourned Lamare a long time ago and carried her death in my chest. I buried her and now, she is alive. I was in a daze but in a good kind of way. Pyper was watching me. I crouched down so my eyes could gaze at hers levelly. We must go home now. The sooner you see your father, the sooner we can go to save Kino and Lamare, I said. Pyper smiled, and because of that, I thought that even gloomy Sinista brightened for a while. I picked up Pyper and carried her. She did not object. Instead, she laid her head on my shoulder. Your father would love to see you back, I said in my hoarse voice. Pyper nodded while her head was still against my shoulder. Yeah. But I can't wait to rescue Kino. I remembered my promise to Lamare that I would keep Kino safe and answered, consider it done. With that, Pyper rested satisfied in my arms. When I started walking, she whispered, I miss my father so much. I can't wait to see him. I heard shrill sounds from overhead. An eagle was flying, soaring, and it had a package dangling from its claws. It circled us 3 times before flying away. Ion Noto. After a lot of maneuvering inside Sinista, what remained of our group finally found our way out. It had been days, and now, here we are, staring at the gates of the Ameresian Palace. I wondered if it had been wrong to run after the boy instead of the tree runners. Cheaters. Bah. They're just as bad as the Grey Men. I hoped to present Lamare Amark and the boy's dead body to the Emperor, and I had neither. Those tree runners ran away with Lamare's body, and I could only hope she's dead now. I must still be able to retrieve it. Undoubtedly, the Emperor would be pleased to finally get hold of the body of a deserter, no matter how insignificant she had been. The boy was another matter. He had the gift of invisibility, and I caught him doing it twice. He was there one moment, and then, he would be gone. His ability to turn invisible was the only logical explanation for why we could not capture him. Somehow, things were shedding answers to many questions, like, why was the boy important to the Emperor? Seeing how slippery the boy had been to capture, I could say that maybe, he was really a threat. And his powers. How was it possible that he could make himself invisible and punch me in the face with so much strength that could rival mine? I must find out his secrets. In that respect, I must find out what the Emperor knew. Come on, men. Move forward, I said to my soldiers as we rode closer to the Ameresian Palace gates. I held my hand up, and all at once, my men stopped moving. Open the gates. I commanded. The Ameresian soldiers peered through the hole as though sensing danger upon our arrival. Emperor's orders, I said, waving the letter to be delivered to their queen, Marcella Benilde. The soldier took one look at the missive I was holding and saw the Emperor's wax seal. "Hand it to us, and we'll give it to Her Majesty," the soldier said. I laughed mockingly. "I will hand this to Her Majesty myself, or she will not read the Emperor's message." The soldier shut the tiny window, and some words were exchanged between him and another soldier. I waited patiently. My men looked tired from the flight. Rhodora had Mayo riding with her. Kilo's son was wide awake, and his eyes, the size of quail's eggs, looked petrified. I heard the metal rubbing against metal as the gates were opened. I rode onward to the palace with my men trailing after me. This time would be different. I walked over to where Her Majesty was sitting. Laras Sendo was situated on the right side of the Queen. He was stern, and a scowl was drawn on his face. I was sure the moment I handed the missive to the Queen, his scowl would grow even more etched on his face. I gave him a sinister smile, one I believed he deserved. When I was only a few yards away from Marcella, I bowed slightly and said, "Your Majesty." I remained in that position waiting for the Queen to acknowledge me. "What is your business here, General?" she asked coldly. "I am just a messenger this time, Your Majesty. The Emperor sent me to personally hand you a directive," I said as I pulled out the missive from my coat pocket and waved it in the air. Marcella nodded at Laras, who immediately walked over and took the missive from my hand. Then, Laras handed the missive to the Queen. "If I may," I said, "the Emperor wishes that his directive be read in front of an audience. He specifically instructed that your advisor read it out loud." The Queen looked confused but could not disobey the Emperor's wishes. She handed the letter to a pudgy man standing on her left side. The pudgy man broke the seal and opened the missive. His eyes took in the message, and his face paled. "Your Majesty, are you certain I should read it aloud?" he asked, his voice nervous. Marcella looked at me, and I met her stare. "Then," she answered, "if it is what my son wishes, then so be it." I laughed triumphantly inside my head, waiting for what was written on the missive to be announced to the audience. I had known what it was even before the message reached the Queen's hands. A thin knife that was heated correctly can do the trick of opening a letter sealed with wax without breaking it. The pudgy man coughed and began, "The Emperor, Maquin Storm Aaron, ordered Ion Noto, War General of the province of Prile, to take Amer as his realm for the betrayal Marcella Benilde committed against the name of her Emperor. Hence, because of this, Marcella Benilde is afforded 10 days to leave the Ameresian palace and find herself an accommodation outside of Achaea, to the borders of Charisthea." He paused. "Signed, Maquin Storm Aaron, Emperor of Achaea, true light of the land." Gasps and groans filled the hall, and it was as I expected. Laras paled and grabbed the letter from the advisor's hand, but it was too late. The pronouncement had been made. And I am at this moment the King of Amer, a well-deserved reward for serving the Emperor loyally over the moon turns. My future was much too promising, especially once I learned why Kino and Lamare Amerk held so much importance to the Emperor. Today, Amer is enough, but the Empire could be mine for the taking in the future. The soldiers wearing the armor of House Benilde need not have to be reminded who their new king was, but there were some who dissented. I expected this, so I had my men ready. Swords were raised around me. I had to kill 3 Ameresian soldiers before the last of them who disagreed with my being king lay sprawling on the palace's marble floors. I raised a hand to wipe the sweat dripping from my forehead. Marcella Benilde sat on her throne, her lips slightly open as though she was still in shock. She probably was. As I walked towards her, what remained of her soldiers knelt, and when I was standing right in front of Marcella, I gave the former queen a twisted smile and said, "I believe you are in my seat, Marcella." That was the moment she wailed.